Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Inept General bringing you my predictions for the announced upcoming Ogre Kingdoms DLC in Total War Warhammer 3. We got the announcement a couple of weeks ago that the next 3 races to get DLC stuff are going to be the Ogre Kingdoms, the Greenskins, and Khorne, and we're going to take a look at each one individually and break down what I think we're going to be getting in those DLCs. If you enjoyed this video, do consider joining or subscribing, or even just dropping a like. Any little bit helps the channel. Got some exclusive content for our members already in the member section, including our ongoing Malice series. If you haven't seen that before, do check the link in the top right hand corner popping up now, where you can watch parts 1 to 3, even if you're not a member of the channel already. And we are revisiting the old retro game Shadow of the Horned Rat. Kicking off with the Ogre Kingdoms today, and we're going to take it a bit differently than we've done some of the videos when we predict DLCs in the past. And today we're going to start with the units, because that's a bit simpler, and the Lord stuff is a bit more of a shot in the dark. And with the units, we're going to start with the ones we're most sure about, and then as we go down, it might seem less and less likely, and we don't know, and a couple of them are going to be, we don't know what CA is going to do with it, but I'll mention those when we get to it. So, the first of the units we are going to talk about today is the Yhetee. For those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with the Ogre Kingdoms, you might find it a bit weird that a Yhetee might appear in the Ogre Kingdom army list. So let's go through the history of the Yhetee as far as the Warhammer world is concerned. So we have to go back some 2,720 years before the Empire was established by Sigmar. And over in the Mountains of Morn, most of the ogres at this point have been driven out of Cathay by the Dragon Emperor summoning down a great comet that struck the earth with enormous force, wiping most of the ogres out and giving form to what is now known as the Great Maw, the god the ogres worship, this huge hole in the ground that devours anything thrown into it. So the ogres are a bit of a shifting people, and they go further west into the Mountains of Morn and what were then known as the Ancient Giant Lands. Now, the giants in Warhammer as they exist now are oafish, stupid, clumsy creatures. But this was not always the case. They once had a thriving civilization, or at least their ancestors did. They probably looked a bit different to the giants we now know today. And they had this beautiful civilization known as the Giant Lands. And so the ogres seeing this were like, oh, we can take this off them. And being a bit more bloodthirsty than the very wise and ancient giants, they set about taking them all out and living in their homeland. So we skip forward about a century and a bit, and by then the ogres have mostly moved a bit further south. It was a bit too cold up in the Ancient Giant Lands with its creepy shimmering sky, and they came down to the more southerly area of the Mountains of Morn. And what happened was not all of them came down, and those who stayed up in the Giant Lands were said to have developed these unnatural mutations. And so around the year negative 2600 of the imperial calendar, the first of the sightings of this supernatural race of Yetis were born, and the ogres instantly recognized it as a mutation of themselves who had been left up there in the Ancient Giant Lands, and they'd changed a lot. So moving forward to modern day, the Yhetee packs inhabit the highest slopes of many of the mountain ranges within the Mountains of Morn, and of course the towering peaks of the ancient giant holes. There, high on the roof of the world, the Yetis survive by preying on beast herds of the highlands, the pale pelts of the Yetis making them hard to spot in the snowy landscape, and only when their shaggy hair is overly matted and blood-speckled are they easy to pick out. There is a strange and almost supernatural connection between the Yetis and the high-altitude mountains themselves. Indeed, the Yetis exude an aura of cold so powerful that those attacked by them will find their limbs stiffened and joints frozen, making them easy prey for these fierce and feral predators. A large-scale attack by a whole pack of Yetis is inevitably heralded by an avalanche, which the creatures trigger deliberately in order to trap their prey before loping down the side of the mountain to claw out and devour their half-frozen victims. Yetis have developed long fused claws that are the natural equivalent of climbing picks, with dew claws on the back hinge allowing them to climb features other races could not negotiate. A blow from a Yetee's iron hand claw will rip off limbs and heads with ease, and they are also ideal for quickly digging out half-frozen victims buried in the snow and ice. Even with their many mutations, there's still a vestige of ogre-like behavior that remains in the Yetees, to ensure they still use clubs of a sort, fashioning ice weapons by the simple expedient method of snapping a branch from a tree and breathing pure cold onto it until it resembles a massive ice-encrusted club. Dominant Yetis sometimes use pairs of these, smashing apart everything in their path. It's not uncommon for an ogre tribe to include some Yetis amongst their ranks. How or why the Yetis are convinced to fight alongside the ogres is subject of much speculation. But whatever the truth, the ogre tyrant is able to summon Yetis to war by a blast on the Great Horn, a huge curling tusk taken from the largest ice mammoth killed by the tribe. The acoustic qualities of this horn, twinned with the mighty lungs of the ogre sounding it, send the blast echoing to the peaks of the mountain ranges. Riding great avalanches of snow, the Yetis will enter the Ogre Kingdoms, ready for the great hunt that is open war. Yetis that spend too much time in the lowlands, which is to them anything below the tree line, become lethargic, and they will begin to wither beneath the hot sun. For these reasons, once their obligation to the ogres is complete, Yetis will return to their mountain lairs. The Yeti creatures are powerful and can sprint as fast as an armored horse. Because of this, they are usually used by an ogre tyrant in much the same way the cavalry are used in other armies, to deliver swift attacks at weak points in the enemy line and to help pursue a defeated opponent from the battlefield. With their sheer brute strength and ferocious natures, Yetis can smash a hole in any army battle line or maul any opponent that dares stand against them. In terms of the rules on the tabletop that Creative Assembly are likely to have a look at, they of course have their Aura of Frost. And this was that the Yetis had evolved a specific affinity with sub-zero temperatures in their mountain homes. This magical aura of cold that they exhale not only freezes the blood and marrow of their victims, but also reaves the crude weapons wielded by Yetis with enchanted ice. Which basically meant on the tabletop that any enemy models in base contact with them would suffer a -1 penalty to weapon skill, and it made their attacks magical. So I can see that being easily implemented. It's a negative melee attack aura with the Yetis having magical attacks potentially for Creative Assembly. Now, it is worth mentioning that we might see a variation on the Yetis, which are known as the Greybacks, which are sort of the heads of the Yeti Plus, if you will. Not a hero unit or anything like that, but they were included in the army book, and we may see CA make a play for that, although I think they're probably just going to put the Yetis in as it is, but, you know, it's something worth considering in terms of units. They may make the Greybacks a sort of dual-wielding variety of the Yeti that's an upgrade from the normal one. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Now, I'm going to give a full list of what I think the actual DLC will be at the end of the video, and do feel free to skip ahead in different sections, as there will be timestamps down below. The next unit that we're pretty much 90% sure we are going to get is going to be the Thundertusks, the largest mount that the ogres have, and probably going to be the centerpiece for the Ogre DLC. So what are the Thundertusks? They are creatures of ice and doom, ancient monsters that strode the darkest ages long ago, when once the world was frozen over. Retreating from the sudden warming of the sun, the forefathers of these mammoth beasts headed to the northern plains, where they became saturated in the magic that was unleashed in those strange lands. Imbued with the unnatural winds, the Thundertusks became a living embodiment of cruel and ever-enduring winter. Primordial things from a long-forgotten past, their hulking mass exudes an aura, a sub-zero blast of arctic air so cold it congeals blood and freezes their prey. Thundertusks advance as relentlessly as a winter storm, using their numbing airs to slow their victims down, allowing the beasts to bring their cumbersome but crushing mass to bear. Thundertusks are solitary wanderers that travel across the cold places of the world, far to the north or high amidst the frozen peaks of mountains, needing a great deal of sustenance to sustain their bulk and icy nimbus. They are constantly roaming in search of fresh meat, but the Thundertusk is not just deadly up close, where it can stomp its frozen foes flat. A Thundertusk's horns attract the elemental power of magic like a lightning conductor. The beast's icy breath mixes with the sorcerous flux, coalescing into swirling spheres of eldritch energy and jagged shards of ice. With a sound akin to the peal of a thunderclap, the Thundertusk can hurl these frozen orbs across the battlefield. Upon impact, the glowing spheres of frost shatters, sending lightning-wreathed icicles spinning through the air. The shards sieve into any exposed flesh, cutting bloody holes into anything within a wide radius. Because of its unnatural penchant for frost, Thundertusks become extremely irritable and uncomfortable in direct sunlight, shedding patches of skin and cultivating coats of icicles upon their pelts can only compensate so much, and so the Thundertusks has developed a unique mechanism for surviving the heat during the relentless fairer seasons when the temperatures rise slightly above freezing. During any prolonged warm spell, a Thundertusk will hibernate within its chosen glacier, hacking and scooping out a crude cave with its gigantic blade-edged tusks until it can retreat from the punishing rays of the sun. There, in a cocoon of ice, the beast will slow its heartbeat and lower its body temperature further still, allowing the Thundertusk's freezing breath to slowly crystallize the moisture until the beast is completely surrounded in cooling ice. Safe from the predation of beasts and ogre tribes of the mountains, the Thundertusk sleeps through the summer in the frozen refuge, healing the damage it sustained during the mating season and slowly digesting the massive quantities of meat that it gouges upon before each hibernation period. When the days begin to shorten and the warmth of the sun retreats once again, the Thundertusk will gradually raise its heartbeat and exert maximum effort upon the glacier around it. Eventually, through sheer brawn and with numerous shifts of its massive shoulders and muscular haunches, the Thundertusk will burst free in a shower of ice and shards and roar its victory over the sun. Hungry beyond measure, it will rampage over the mountainsides, generating a shimmering chill that numbs the air. Thundertusks use their great tusks to scoop up any living creature they can find, tossing them to the air and catching them in their blunt maws to devour. When they meet on the mountainous slopes, ogres and Thundertusks eye each other warily. For a strong meat-gathering party or a highly skilled hunter are some of the few predators that can actually bring down such a beast. A slain Thundertusk is a great boon to a hungry ogre tribe, but slaying one is no easy business. Thundertusks are known to crush, gouge, and freeze their way through most attacks. Just occasionally, though, a tribe will manage to bring low an injured Thundertusk, and by use of iron chains, the thickness of an ogre's forearm, stout clubs, and copious quantities of red meat, they can train the beast. Captured Thundertusks are kept in these chains and dragged about for a long time, but can eventually coexist alongside the ogre tribes, and can even be broken in to permit a few riders to sit upon their enormously broad shoulders. Thus, a Thundertusk will join a tribe, becoming a living engine of frozen destruction. These massive mounts give ogres that ride them extra 20 tons of brute force to smash things with, an excellent view of the battlefield, and also an ice-cold walking larder with which to keep their meat fresh. In battle, ogres use Thundertusks to blast the foe with ranged attacks and lend support to the main ogre battle line. Towering high above the heads of all but the tallest combatants, the Thundertusk and its crew unleash a hail of fire, even as they advance upon the foe. A Thundertusk will often aim to crash into enemy lines at the same time as the bulk of the ogre attack, supporting their bone-crunching charge with its own chilling aura of frozen doom. And so that is the Thundertusk, able to attack from range and crushingly devastating at close range as well. So how would the rules of the Thundertusk be carried over to Creative Assembly and Total War Warhammer? Well, they will be a large target, of course. They'll cause terror. They have a rule called Natural Armor, which will be a ward save or just really a good amount of armor. I'll have Numbing Chill, which meant on the tabletop that an enemy within 6 inches of a Thundertusk has always strike last special rule. So basically just slowing down their attack speed. Now this will probably take the form of some sort of melee and melee attack debuff in Total War Warhammer, if I was to guess how they do it. And the next rule they have is Smooth Ride, which meant their accuracy wouldn't be affected with either the massive snowball that the Thundertusk hurls towards the enemy or the rider's harpoon on top. So they could be pretty accurate even as they were on the move. So basically fire whilst moving for the unit in Total War Warhammer would probably be the way we'll see that interpreted. And of course they had their Sphere of Frost-Wreathed Ice, the big snowball, which acted as a stone thrower on the tabletop. And that's about it for the Thundertusk. We'll probably see, because it's a big creature and Creative Assembly say these cost a lot of money and they like to make a feral version of these big creatures that they make in these DLC packs, we'll probably see the Thundertusk with riders and the feral Thundertusk make an appearance in this DLC. So let's move on to the next unit, and that is the Maneaters, which we have seen in the game before, but I think we're going to get a final variety of the Maneaters. And the Maneaters, for those who don't know, do make an appearance in the game, but to give you a little bit of the lore, the Maneaters are basically the veterans of many campaigns. They fought in far-off lands. They're the ogres who go off and make themselves mercenaries. They tend to get great fighting skill, those who survive and come back. And it's said that they learn something about all the far-off lands they travel to, so they pick up different traits. How that played on the tabletop was that a Maneater unit could pick of a list of 8 attributes and get any 2 that they wanted for their Maneater unit. And even if you had 2 Maneater units in an army, they could have different ones. But every unit in that regiment had to have the same traits. So you couldn't mix and match and sort of have each individual unit have 2 different traits from the one next to it. That's not the way it worked. So the variant we're missing really is the dual weapon wielding Maneater, which has this great model on the tabletop of this kind of ninja from Nippon Maneater. Hopefully we see something like that. They might go a bit different, but that's just such an iconic model that I think we'll probably get a Maneater that looks a bit like that, or a unit of Maneaters that look a bit like that. Now, you could also argue there's room for a brace of pistols Maneater. We have the Ogre pistol one, but that's sort of a melee and pistol one. You could have one just multiple, like, firing pistols all the time, and that's all they had. A bit like a shorter range lead belcher. That's a possibility, but I think the dual-wielding one is probably the more likely of the 2. This was probably where we started entering the realm of speculation with the Maneater variant. Don't know if that's going to be a possibility, but we've actually started to run out of units for the Ogre Kingdoms. There's not a lot left in the sort of 8th edition army book to pull from. So Creative Assembly are going to have to get a bit creative. Now, there have been a sort of multiple White Dwarf articles adding to some elements, and one element that it does add to is the idea of the Gnoblars getting an extended roster. And they did this in an article that laid out a whole bunch of different opportunities for Gnoblars, and amongst those is something I want you guys to bear in mind for a little bit later in the video, is the head honcho, the idea of this Gnoblar general. Now, even in the description of this Gnoblar general, this Gnoblar would never be able to command ogres about. It wouldn't have any ogres in its army, but it's kind of a fun idea if you just want to put together a Gnoblar-only force. And we'll get to why that's important a little bit later, but let's just continue on the Gnoblars. So here on this page, you can see we have a variety of Gnoblars that appeared in a White Dwarf article, I believe. And so let's just go through them a little bit quickly. If you guys want to pause the video and just read through this page, you can, by all means. But I'm just going to go through a little bit quickly what makes each one different. So you've got the Man-Biters. The idea is that these guys are the hardest of all Gnoblars. They've maybe been given a bit of extra kit. They're the hardiest of hards. And I think thematically, they go quite well. The Man-Biters, with the whole DLC pack, could be based around Man-Eaters. So you get the Man-Eaters and you get the Man-Biters. And their only special rule in this was that they could join a Dogs of War unit, which basically made them a mercenary unit. But I think what you could do, Creative Assembly, would just, if they're the best of the best, they've been given the best gear of all Gnoblars, they'd just be a heavily armored, armor-piercing Gnoblar unit, or at least for Gnoblars, Gnoblars. It could maybe, if not beat a unit of Empire Halberdiers, at least take them to the very limit, and that's a good counter just to tie them up while the ogres go and thrash the rest of the army that isn't anti-large. That could be an idea. You have the lucky git that were Gnoblars who could re-roll a failed roll, as well as have magic resistance and a ward save. That's really about it for the lucky gits. You had the pigback riders who basically had the ability to use spears on the charge, to sum it up for you a little bit. That's not that interesting. The blood Gnoblars are kind of interesting. They can set up traps, and that could be a very fun mechanic if these guys can go around. Maybe they have stalk, and you can put them around the battlefield. Hopefully they don't get found out, and they can lay down the equivalent of landmines or traps or what have you for troops that will walk onto certain parts of the territory. That could be an interesting play, a little bit complex, something we haven't... I don't believe we've seen the unit lay down traps in Total War Warhammer before. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but nothing just springs to mind off the top of my head. And we have the Boglar, which is proof that Creative Assembly have already seen this page, so may well take other ideas from it. The Boglar are the Regiment of Renown Gnoblars at the moment, and they do get regen in water as it stands, which is their ability. It's currently the Trapper Boglars, I believe, so you could do a normal version of them as well, potentially, to include in this pack, but, you know, that might be a bit of a cop-out. We'll have to wait and see what they decide on. I think probably the most likely of these lists, we're going to see the Man-Biters. Maybe we'll see the others, who knows. Now, let's move on to the Lords. The most likely Lord appeared in a data leak with the last big update, and that was Golgfag, the infamous mercenary of the Warhammer world. There are more tales told about him than any other ogre alive, and Golgfag himself is said to spin a great many of them. Though he exaggerates with wild abandon, Golgfag is still the most successful of all ogre mercenary captains. He has won countless battles, looted upon the sacred island of Ulthuan, set eyes upon the ruinous Skaven Blight, and survived, has guzzled more kegs of Bugman's ale than most dwarves have ever seen, and has been personally decorated by Emperor Karl Franz. Golgfag has traveled the world, and he's a classic, since Dogs of War days, Warhammer character that will be probably making an appearance, almost 99% sure, as the legendary lord for this Ogre DLC. He's probably the most famous Ogre character in Warhammer, more famous than Grecius Goldtooth, so he'll probably be the main character in this DLC. His rise to fame happened around the year 2500, so just before Karl Franz was coronated, and this was a fight between an orc war boss known as Nasrak Badtooth and the dwarves, and Golgfag would sort of bounce about the two sides. We're not going to do a whole bunch of Golgfag lore, we're probably going to save that for a different video, but that's sort of when he started to come to fame, around 2510 of the Imperial calendar, so now Karl Franz has been established for some 8 years, and then by 2518, it said that this is when his name started to become infamous among ogres. Every ogre mercenary took the name Maneater. Such was Golgfag's fame at this point. Every mercenary took the name Maneater because he was called Maneater. And so you see the Maneater theme as well as the Frosty Mountain theme kind of appearing as the two main driving parts of this DLC, which goes back to explain sort of why I think maybe the Man-Biter name will be used for another unit of Gnoblars that we might see in this DLC pack. He had the rule easy come, easy go, which is not going to be easy to interpret in Total War Warhammer, but let me just tell you what it is. It was the fact that over the years, Golgfag had owned and lost countless magic items. At the start of a battle, before deployment, a player would roll 2d6, multiply the score by 10, and you can equip Golgfag with magical items with a total point value that is equal or less to that result. Which basically meant he got a couple of free magical items that didn't count towards his overall points. So it could be really powerful depending on what you chose, and I don't know how they're going to make that. Maybe some sort of mechanic around him collecting magical items at a higher rate, or he has maybe a 50, like his character traits, his army trait will be that they collect magical items or they steal them off opponents at a higher rate. Something along those lines is probably how CA is going to interpret it. He also had his unit of Man-Eaters, and we're probably going to see this like Grimgor's special unit of Black Orcs. It's probably just going to be a banner So we'll probably see Golfag's Maneaters just have a banner and they'll make an appearance on the battlefield that way. Or they might even just be a regiment of renown. So that's another possibility as well. That would be cool to see them. There's an outside chance that they may also introduce a character known as Gark Ironskin. But Gark is basically he's an ogre who has this semi-demonic mount that was provided to him by the Chaos Dwarves after he lost his original mount, which was a Rhinox. He's known to have a good relationship with them, providing them with a lot of slaves, and they in turn provide him with armor and stuff like that. So he'd make an interesting character to add, but I don't think you can get him in because Golgfag is much more well known than Gark Ironskin. So you'd have to get him in first. There's an opportunity to make Gark the free DLC Legendary Lord, but he's a big model, and that makes me think that CA are less likely to provide him as a free Legendary Lord for the Ogre Kingdoms. But you never know. It's wait and see. It's maybe a fingers crossed rather than a realistic prospect. But it would be great to see Gark make an appearance in the game at some point in time. And then we're going into speculation land a bit with the general, because as far as the 8th edition army book is concerned, we have the generals we need, and then so we have to think, what way is CA going to go about introducing a general with something different than the Tyrant or the Slaughtermaster. Earlier on, you guys will remember, I mentioned the head honcho for the Gnoblars. That would be really brave, I think, from Creative Assembly. It would be fun for people to be able to just field Gnoblar-only armies. That would be maybe just to support an ogre army, which would keep the cost down. And that could be a bit fun, just to have bodies in there, led by the head honcho. But you couldn't have any ogres in the head honcho's army. I think that would go too much against the law. Any ogre would just eat the head honcho and just take over whatever was going on. What does that leave us with? That leaves us with having to kind of make up a new kind of ogre general. And if you put yourselves in CA, you're like, okay, we're going to go for Golgfag Maneater. There might be another unit of Maneater variables. We might make Gnoblar Manbiters. There could be a theme around Maneaters, so maybe we make a Maneater general. And so this would maybe take the form of something called a Maneater Captain, which on the tabletop was just like a Maneater with slightly better stats. And so they could make the Maneater Captain a general. That's a possibility. Maybe get him to have extra unit caps for allies. You know, recruit a bit more from around the world. He has a bit more of a mixed up army, a bit more of a mercenary army. And then maybe make his armies more expensive as the Maneater Captain. That's a possibility. They may look to the Yhetees, although the Yhetees aren't really the sort to lead any army, and maybe make the sort of Greymane I mentioned earlier, sort of Yhetee general. I don't think that's likely. So I think it's either going to be sort of the head honcho or the Maneater Captain, and I think the Maneater Captain, just by it's simple, they don't have to do too much work on it. They have the ogre models. They just touch up the cosmetics a bit and then give it a better stat line, and they're done. It's an easy fix rather than making a Gnoblar one that would not have any ogres in the army. But I hope in my heart it's the head honcho, but I think we are going to get probably a Maneater Captain because it's the easiest route, and that tends to be the way these things go. As far as the legendary hero for the ogres, I'd be very surprised if it was not the one character missing at this point then from if they do Golgfag, if it wouldn't be the only other character missing from the 8th edition army book, and that is Brag the Gutsman. Ogres are battle-hardened and a fearless race, but there walks one amongst their number who is held in dread. Even veterans of 1,000 battles feel corpulent shivers at the very name of their killer amongst killers. This shadowy figure that deals out the most gruesome kind of death imaginable. He is the champion executioner of ogre kind, a slayer of kings and heroes. To see him on the field of battle is to see death itself at work. He is Brag the Gutsman, and none he has marked for slaughter have ever survived. Wielding his hook blade with prowess, Brag could slice off a foe's head with a flick of his powerful wrists. Time and again, Brag slew foes, beheading orc chieftains, Skaven warlords, and heavily armored champions of chaos. It was not until Brag turned his weapon against his own kind that his comrades learned to know fear. During intertribal wars, Bragg discovered that the bladed hook could cut above a victim's gut plate and slide down to scoop out his foe's guts, sending them splashing wetly to the ground. Ogres are used to heinous wounds, but disembowelments cause them to cringe. There can be no recovery from a gut blow, and with their extraordinary size, it takes a long, painful time for the innards to fully uncoil outwards. Bragg has become a much-feared executioner, or gutsman, as the ogres now call him. Now, this is a great sort of face-of-death character for the ogres, great legendary hero potential, more of a duelist, really, on the tabletop. That was the idea of him. He'd go around doing challenges. That'd be fun. And he only had the one magic item, and that was the Great Gut Gouger, his odd blade there. And that's a massive poleaxe that was created by Bragg from a magical weapon formerly wielded by a Black Orc warlord. Its power seems to be unlocked by the visceral thrill of single combat and comes alive when Bragg steps forth to challenge the best warriors that the enemy can offer. To accept such a duel against the Gutsman is soon after regretted, as many notches in the Great Gut Gouger haft can attest. And the weapon base gave him +1 strength, and when he was in a challenge, he'd get the ability Killing Blow. And if he won his challenge, that unit would then be disrupted for the remainder of the turn, which could be beneficial. In terms of the generic hero, that's going to be the missing hero, that's going to be the Bruisers. This one we're pretty sure about as well. Aside from a tyrant himself, a tribe's bruisers are the most imposing ogres in terms of sheer size and strength, and often related to the kingdom's ruler. Bruisers usually act as enforcers for under-chieftains. They spend a great deal of time smashing and pummeling in the name of their tyrant. These guys are just the muscle. They're the melee hero of the ogre army. We've seen melee heroes they'll do stuff like they'll get the training skill, stuff like that. They'll encourage discipline. They'll give a leadership boost to those around them. That's probably how the Bruiser is going to be interpreted. Pretty straightforward hero unit there. So we've either gone through or talked about the units and lords and heroes that are going to be making an appearance for the Ogre Kingdoms in this DLC. So time to get to the crux of it. When it really comes down to it, how do I think this is going to play out? Assuming it takes the form of the DLCs we've had previously, and as a kind of budget thing, it seems like they're making this a solid template for things going forward. That might change. I don't know at this point, but I'm just going to go off what I know as I sit here with you guys. So we're going to get Legendary Lord. I think that's going to be Golgfag. I don't think there's any question about it. It got data mined out the last update. It seems like the way they're going. Generic Lord. Again, I'd love to see the head honcho, but I think it's going to be the sort of a Man-Eater captain or Man-Eater general. They're going to call it something like that, but some sort of Man-Eater focused general. Legendary hero is going to be Bragg the Gutsman. A generic hero is going to be the Bruiser. I'm pretty sure about that. Units, we're definitely getting Yhetee. We're definitely getting a Thundertusk. We may get a new variant of the Man-Eater just to go along with Golgfag, which I think will probably be the dual weapon, as I discussed in that section. And I think we're going to get another unit of Gnoblars, probably the Man-Biter, just because it fits so nicely in a sort of Man-Eater focused DLC. And they're not going to use the model of the Thundertusk without just making a feral Thundertusk, I don't think. So they're going to count that as one of the units to try and skip a corner. In terms of free DLC, it's really hard to say. I mean, the practical part of me wants to say it's probably maybe going to be another Gnoblar unit. They might make the Man-Biters part of the DLC and then maybe do something like the Lucky Gits as a free DLC, something small, something relatively easy to do. But you know what? Let's just hit and hope for Gark Ironskin. That would be a great extra lord for the ogres to have. And you know what? If they're not going to make... This really finishes off the ogres, so if we're not getting him now, we might get him in a sort of weird chaos pack with chaos ogres, but I don't think that's going to happen. So if we can't get him now, we're probably not going to get him. So fingers crossed. Let's hit and hope. Let's go for Gark Ironskin for the free DLC. That's what I think the Ogre DLC is going to look like. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments below. And if you've liked the video, please do drop a like, subscribe, and maybe consider joining if you can. That would be great and a huge support to the channel. Other than that, guys, as always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright, guys? Bye.